We're looking for swift passage of the federal budget that passed through the House of Commons with all the legitimacy that the elected House of Commons has.
Justin Trudeau on Friday reminding senators that his government is elected and they are not. Therefore, in his opinion, they have no right to hold up, pull apart, or otherwise change the government's centerpiece budget bill. That bill is now stuck in the upper house and time is ticking. The House rises next week. The big issue, a $35 billion infrastructure bank included in that bill, an institution that brings private capital and government funds together to build revenue-generating infrastructure projects in this country, like toll bridges, for example. But the Senate has a lot of questions about it, and so far the Senate has suggested this: carve the planned infrastructure bank plan out of the bill so they can take more time to study that and pass the other parts. They've also objected to other parts in the bill that would allow the federal government to automatically hike the excise taxes on beer, wine, and spirits every year tied to inflation, along with the fact that some senators consider this an omnibus bill, and they don't believe in that either. Notably, it's been Liberal senators voicing some of the strongest criticism, like Senate Liberal leader Joseph Day and Independent Senator Andre Pratt, formerly Liberal. Is this what Justin Trudeau had in mind when he cut Liberal senators loose? We're back with the Sunday Scrum. Susan Riley, John Ibbitson, and Katie O'Malley join me from Ottawa. Katie, what do you make of this showdown between the Senate and the Prime Minister?
Well, as a big fan of the Senate, I know which flag I'll be waving eagerly. Actually, just to correct you on that one, Andre Pratt was actually appointed as an independent. He's never been a Liberal, okay. So he was one of the, I think he was in the first batch of appointments under this Prime Minister. It's interesting because this is obviously because this budget bill has been kind of lurking through the Senate for a few weeks now. This is the first time I've heard the Prime Minister really sound that done with the Senate and their various objections. So I'm not sure if that was just a momentary spark of frustration and he'll be back to respecting their right to differ on Monday, or if he is really reaching the end of his patience. But the thing is, there are very limited sort of options for the Prime Minister in terms of actually forcing this through. The Senate is going to do what the Senate's going to do. They may well, I suspect they may not end up voting to split the infrastructure bank away from the rest. They could, but my hunch is I think it'll be really close, but I suspect they may end up voting not to do that, in which case the government's life becomes a little bit easier because that can probably be, chunted through the Finance Committee in reasonably good time. If they were to split off the bill and go ahead and do that, I think it's a pretty safe bet that when that was sent back to the House of Commons would say nope. And the Senate, even Andre Pratt has already said, if the House of Commons rejects whatever we do, well, fine, we'll let them go ahead. We just want to get our objections on the record. So I don't think this is a crisis looming, but it is a really interesting sort of a demonstration of exactly what the Senate, and to be fair, the Senate has always had the power and the ability to do this, and it has caused trouble for governments in the past. So this isn't purely unique to this new configuration. Andre Pratt on Friday on Power and Politics made it clear that this was a strong suggestion. And I'll just say to our control room, it's not the first Pratt clip that I planned, it's the second one, if we could play that one.
The Senate's job is to suggest things. The government, in many cases, has accepted our amendments, but when they don't, since the new Senate has existed, we've never insisted. We've never blocked legislation, never rejected legislation. So, I mean, our job is to alert public opinion, suggest things to the government. If the government insists on its version of the bill, we accept it because we're very much aware that we are appointed, we're not elected. Okay, John, what's your reaction to that? At the end of the day, they put their cards out there. They're not going to push it.
No, look, I love this new Senate. That may be a strong emotion to take towards the upper house, but there are columnists and editorialists at my newspaper and other publications who believe that the Senate is becoming rogue, out of control. These are unelected people. How dare they defy the will of the House? But the Senate is there. It has always been there. It has been there since Confederation, and there's nothing you can do about it. It cannot be amended, and it's been full of party hacks and bagmen, and had been brought to an absolute nadir of of disrespect during the Senate expenses scandal. These new appointments are doing their job. They're highly qualified. They're thinking carefully. They have made a number of recommendations on a number of bills, all the way back to the assisted dying legislation that the House has reflected upon and said, oh, yeah, you know what, Senate, you're right, and incorporated those recommendations. The Senate has always deferred once the House sent the bill back and said, all right, now you must pass it. There are serious and legitimate objections about this infrastructure bank, how the board of directors is appointed. And the House just rammed it through because it is an omnibus bill, and it should take some time to reconsider. So I think the Senate is doing exactly what it should be doing. We are moving towards the Senate as it possibly and could be and should be.
Yeah, okay. I agree. I'm not a big fan of the Senate, unlike Katie. I never have been, but this is the best we can probably hope for in a way. First of all, yes, they're causing some trouble to the Prime Minister, to which I would say, you know, be careful what you wish for, Mr. Prime Minister. This is exactly the kind of Senate that he envisioned. Andre Pratt, I thought, made a very reasonable argument for their attempts to improve legislation. By the way, I think they're right that this infrastructure bank should be separated out from the budget bill. It is an omnibus bill in all but name.
We'll talk about that in a second, Susan, but what about the fact that the Prime Minister is saying that they have no right to do this because they are not elected on a money bill?
Yeah, but well, he's saying that, but he's saying both things as usual, as he often does. He's both making that point. The Senate in effect didn't agree with him. They basically said, no, we do have a right by a narrow margin to discuss this. I think that despite no matter what the details of the debate, this is so much less squalid than what the Harper Senate, the Senate when Harper was in charge, used to deal with. I mean, then we were talking about, you know, backroom deals and attempts to thwart various motions and ideas, and not to mention the money scandal, the spending scandals and all that kind of thing. So we are now, yeah, we do have a feisty, interesting Senate, but they're dealing with real issues that are important. They're making serious cases on issues that are important.
Katie, what about that idea that the Senate cannot, you know, the Prime Minister's assertion that the Senate cannot initiate money bills, and that if they carve this up, they're in essence initiating two money bills, and that's not within their mandate. Other things, he's saying, fine, but not the budget.
To be fair, and I will give the Prime Minister this, the Senate Speaker actually agreed with that position, and last Thursday ruled that Pratt's motion was in fact out of order. One thing you can do in the Senate that you can't do in the House is you can overturn your Speaker, which is what they decided to do. So I will, you know, to give the Prime Minister fair due, the argument that this is actually technically outside the bounds of what the Senate can do with a money bill because of the initiation, that is not a sort of a long shot argument. That's actually what the Speaker said. So the Senate is now kind of verging into, now whether or not I think that should be the case, there were some very good arguments made against it by, you mentioned Senator Joseph Day, he was one of them, but also Senator Joan Fraser, who's I think the Deputy Senate Liberal leader. And it was pretty clear that senators they think that in this particular case they should be allowed to do so, which is why they overruled the Speaker on that. But it's a fair argument to have. I think that one of the problems, and it has been addressed, and I know you've said we'll deal with it later, but I just wanted to point it out again, is that it never really made sense in hindsight to have this infrastructure bank embedded into the rest of the budget bill. Most of the budget provisions are things that could be, you know, passed or amended or defeated on a much more simple level. This proposal to set up the bank should have been separate all along. So on that, I think we all sympathize with the Senate on that bigger picture.
No, we're talking about it now. It's right on time. Let me just bring Andre Pratt again, speaking on Power and Politics with Rosemary on Friday, explaining why they need to know more, why they want to hive off the infrastructure bank out of the bill. Let's take a listen to that.
It's important to know exactly, for instance, what is the role of politicians in those projects? Will they choose the projects? On what criteria? And what is important also is that Canadians should know that on those projects, they will pay tolls. Yes. So the risk may be diminished, but the price will increase for taxpayers
in some ways you're paying
another
twice.
way.
Yeah.
That's right. So I think it's important that before we legislate, Canadians understand what is the role of that bank, how it will work, so that it's when it starts on not only on a good financial footing, but also on a good democratic footing, that Canadians really understand what this is and what it's for.
John.
Oh. I think the government is a bit high-horsed about all of this, if that's a phrase. When the bill the budget was first introduced, I said, "Hey, guess what? This is an omnibus bill," and Jerry Butts, the advisor to the Prime Minister, went on Twitter to say, "No, it's not. How dare you say such a thing?" Because the Liberals had excoriated the Conservatives over their omnibus bills. They introducing new parliamentary procedures to limit the ability of governments to introduce omnibus bills, and here their critics were saying this is another omnibus bill, just like the Harper ones, and they insisted it wasn't, that it's all legitimate. So when the Senate comes forward and says, guys, it's an omnibus bill, and not only is it an omnibus bill, but we have to hive parts of it off so we can study them more carefully, it flies in the direct face of what I think they honestly believe in the Prime Minister's office and the Finance Department the bill is all about. So it's these troublesome priests telling the Prime Minister of the day that he doesn't have unfettered power, and he is the one who created these troublesome priests in the first place. It's all a bit rich and a bit ironic, but I think it is the Senate doing the job that the Senate's supposed to do.
Susan.
Andre Pratt is infinitely more credible than a Mike Duffy, for example. He's an exemplar of the new kind of independent-minded senator. He was a very well-known, he's kind of the John Ibbotson of Quebec, a very well-known newspaper columnist and a very thoughtful person who makes some very good points about the infrastructure bank. The insistence on rules, both with Senate and in the Prime Minister's office, can be the last refuge of scoundrels, actually. The larger question is political. It looks like an omnibus bill. It is a very complicated and novel structure that they're trying to set up. Most Canadians don't have a clue what it's about. I think Mr. Pratt's arguments are very resonant, and they're way more important than technicalities about what's a money bill and what isn't.